Greta Schulz, and today I want to share with you some of the things that I've learned over the years to make me successful in sales. Now, some of the things that you're going to learn and we're going to talk about today are going to be things that you do, but some of them you're not going to do at all. The key here is doing them in order and having a process to do them. When I first started out in sales, when I got out of college, I was recruited by Xerox Corporation, which back in the 80s, that was a huge big deal. It was the place to work. There was lots and lots of people interviewing, hundreds of them. It went down to 50, it went down to 20, and there was only 6 of us hired. I was very excited. Not only was I excited, it also built my ego to say, they obviously see what I have. My personality is going to make me sell. It always has. I can convince anybody of anything. And I know some of you have said the same thing about yourselves. So what I did was, when I joined Xerox, the other 5 people and myself had a training system that they started us on. And we sat in that room every day, all day, and went through this training system. I'm going to be really honest with you. A couple of us really were intently learning it, but most of us kind of figured, listen, we already know how to do this. We got great personalities. We're really outgoing. We're friendly. People love us. They're going to buy from us anyway. Yeah. So after several months of this, we kind of graduated from our training class, and we then were sent out in the field. And I had a couple of successes, but I got to tell you, I wasn't as successful as I thought I was going to be. This was tough. This was the real world. So after getting to a point of several months of the people that were in management saying to me, Greta, what's going on? And me sitting back and scratching my head, and then they would ask me, are you using this? Are you doing that? And of course I wasn't. So I said, you know what? I have to dust off these books and these tapes and look at these things again and really get to know it. I'll tell you what, that was the best course I ever took because I forced myself to take it. And I didn't want to lose my job. So I looked at that every single night. I studied it every day. I practiced it. I really jumped in 110%. And eventually I figured out what this process thing was. And you know what? It made a lot of sense. So over the years, as I used the process that I learned when I was at Xerox, I've discovered things over the years that, number one, are now a little antiquated. Number two, things that I thought were really good in that process. And number three, there were also some things that I just didn't think were as good. So now it's been over 25 years, and I have developed what I feel are the best pieces in a sales process that I have found over the years of being in sales management, being in sales training, sales consulting. For all those things, I took what I felt was the best. So that's what I'm going to be sharing with you today. So to sell is not to sell is the idea of getting people to self-realize that what you have is what's right for them. If it is not pushy, it's not slick, it's not memorizing scripts and memorizing words. It's not about that. It's about having a process that you follow using your own words and your own style. That's the only way it's going to work. We all know what happens when we try to memorize something, and it just is a disaster. So I want to go through some of those things today and give you some of my knowledge and share with you what's helped me over the years, and I'm hoping that it'll also help you. What I want to start with is I hear lots and lots of challenges from people that are in sales or wearing the sales hat, because not everybody has salesperson on their business card. People that have shared with me over the years of all the places that I go in the country and I speak, there's about 20, 25 challenges that I hear consistently. But there are about 5 that I hear all the time. So let's talk through these a little bit because you may have the same challenges. Number 1, getting think it over too often. Man, if I don't hear this every time I talk to somebody, I would be amazed. Here's the thing about getting think it over. Getting think it over 99% of the time is an excuse for a no. It really isn't a think it over. It's just a very nice way for them to say, I don't think so. But most people are uncomfortable being that blunt. Plus, they probably like you and think you're a nice person and they don't want to hurt your feelings. So they say, I'll think about it. And what does I think about sound like? It sounds like, I'll let you know if we don't have budget right now, call me in 2 weeks, send me something, give me some references, call me in a month, check with me. There's a million excuses, and that's all they are. Think it over is the number 1 problem we have in sales. Why? Because it's not black or white, it's gray. And gray, if you can't get your arms around. It's like air. So What you want to do is you want to make sure that you get every person to some sort of a decision. And even if the decision is no, that's okay. So we're going to talk about think it over and how to take that out of the equation completely for you when we go through this today. The second thing is networking without a system. You know, networking is a big buzzword today. There's networking groups like B&I, there's networking organizations like chambers of commerce and trade organizations. There's all sorts of things that people get together and network. Well, that's terrific, but no one's ever really taught us how to network. So if we go to a networking function, we walk around, we feel uncomfortable, we pass out business cards, we get some business cards, and after a couple of months of this, we say, I'm not going to go back, it didn't do me any good. Because that's not how networking works. Networking truly has a process like everything else. It's about giving to other people. It's not about taking. It's not about direct selling. It's about building relationships. Now, one thing I want you to understand when I use the term building relationships, most people invariably turn the word relationships into friendships. Building relationships is not building friendships. Building relationships is understanding about each other, respecting each other enough to help each other. That's what it's about, and we'll talk more about that in our segment today. The third one I hear is not having the ability to forecast what sales income you will get and when it'll happen. One of the issues that we have in sales is, and the reason people either get out of it or are afraid to go in it is, I don't know how much money I'm going to make. I can't depend on 1 month is up and 1 month is down. What if I don't make any money? Well, if you have a proper system, you should be able to project on target with what's going to close and when. If you don't know that, then you're not following any kind of a system except your prospect system. And they'll dangle you around like they're puppeteers and you've got loose arms. So you have to make sure that you understand what's going to be coming in, and when you have a process, every step along the way gets you closer and closer and closer to that close. You know the date, you know the time, you know the amount. You know when that's going to happen. You also know if it's not going to happen at all. And it's important to understand those things early. Number 4 is doing too many proposals and bids not turning into sales. Boy, I hear this one a lot. Well, you know, I talk to them, I either get a call or I cold call them. I talk to them for a few minutes on the phone. They say, fine, send me a proposal. Or I go in and see them. They talk to me for a few minutes. I ask a few questions and they say, send me a proposal. Then I send it to them and then I start calling them. Did you check on the proposal yet? No, I have to check with my partner. I have to look at this. I have to look at that. Here comes the excuses again. And I call them and I call them and I call them. You guys call that follow-up. I call that stalking. Do not follow up, follow up, follow up. Every single time you do a proposal, you should know what's most important to them, if you've agreed on what they want to do to solve it, if you've agreed on the amount of dollars that they will give to you if they believe you have solved their issues, and if you also have understood right up front what's going to happen when you do propose. What's the time frame? Who's involved? What are the steps? You need to know those things. And most of us don't do a real good job of uncovering that information. If you did, you would not be doing proposals out there for nothing. One of the things you should ask yourself is, if you had to pay $500 out of your pocket every time you sat down and did a proposal, would you do it? And when you sit down to do one and you had to analyze that, if you said, oh yeah, I think this is a good shot, I'd pay $500 for this one because I feel really good about it, fine. But most of us wouldn't take that chance. If you wouldn't take that chance, you shouldn't be doing it. The last challenge that I hear most often is really what we're talking about, selling without a system. You know, most of us are in sales or business development or wearing the sales hat somewhere along the way because somebody said, you got a good personality, you should be in sales. It's not about having a good personality. Yes, being able to intermingle with people and understand what makes people tick, and all of those things are very, very important, don't get me wrong. But having a system of knowing where you are at each point, knowing when things are going to close, knowing what your process is, and you being in charge of that process is the most important thing. So we're going to cover these challenges and others as we go along today. The next thing I want you to understand is sales is all about psychology. The psychology of selling is what we're really talking about here. When we try to make selling too intellectual, it doesn't work. And when I say too intellectual, what I mean is, well, the reason you should work with us is we do this and we do this and we're bigger and faster and that's intellectual selling. That's not how selling works. If you're selling to people, which I'm assuming most of you are, then it's about the psychology and the interaction with people. So the one thing you need to understand is it's a gut thing. Decisions are made from the heart and the gut, not the head. We try to sell with the head all the time. This is what we do, here's our statistics, here's our backup, here's the numbers we've had in the past, here's our references, wah, wah, wah. That is not why people buy. But those are the things that often we're taught, and those are the things that we bring forward. That is not how to sell. So we're going to change that on you right away. The next thing we need to understand is tell it like it is. For example, when somebody asks me, well, why should I work with your coaching program as opposed to somebody else's? You know what my answer is? I don't know. Maybe you shouldn't. I don't know enough about you yet. I don't know enough about what you're trying to accomplish, what your challenges are, and you don't know enough about what I do and how I do it. So if we want to establish that, let's sit down for a few minutes. Let me ask you some questions and learn a little bit about what's going on. You'll, I'm sure, have questions for me about what I do. And at the end of that conversation, we'll discover one of two things. Either, hey, what you've got going on and what I do is a fit, and we'll figure out what our next step is, or we'll decide, you know what you're looking for and what I do are not a fit, and we'll come to the conclusion that it's just a no. And that's okay too. That's what we need to do. People today, especially after in this economy that we've been in, even if we're recovering, it's very important that people are analyzing a lot heavier what they're doing and how they're spending their money. Decision makers hire people and professionals that they trust. Traditional selling often destroys trust. Because when somebody says, why should I work with you, or what makes your thing different, you go, oh, it's this and this and this and this, the trust goes away. You have to stop pitching. Pitch is for baseball, not sales. So the last thing here in the psychology of people is if you teach people how to treat you. Sales resistance is not a natural part of the sales process. It's a direct byproduct of the salesperson's behavior. You've seen them. You know what a typical salesperson looks like, acts like, walks like, talks like. As soon as you act, walk, talk, smell anything like a salesperson, you'll be treated like one. And being treated like one is all the excuses. Tell me why I should go with you. Go ahead and sell me. If you have to be cheaper. You know, you've heard it all. That's the reason. So our responsibility is to make sure that we understand the psychology underneath the way people make decisions. When you have a sales process, you should always have one of three positive outcomes. The expectation or outcome of every conversation, whether it's on the phone or in person, should always have one of these three. Now, I'm not sure you're getting this now, but if you don't have one of these, this is a very important thing to remember. The first one is you want to have the positive outcome that everybody wants, which is a yes. We want to have a yes. When we're talking to somebody on the phone, in person, whatever, the number one outcome we want is a yes with money. Of course. Now, we don't always get that. And if we don't get that, what's the next best thing? I hear a lot of people say, think it over. We already know that's not a good idea. But what is the next best thing to a yes? It's what I call a clear next step. And a clear next step has some specific things in it. It has a date of when you are going to follow up. It has a time of when you're going to follow up, and it has the expectations or outcomes of what the expectation of that next meeting is. And you've both agreed to it. A clear next step is not something that you walk away and say, I'll call him next Tuesday. No, a clear next step is something you've agreed together to put on your calendar, a date and time of when you're going to follow up, and here's what we're going to do at that meeting, whether it's on the phone or in person. That is a clear next step. Anything else is not. So if you don't get a yes and you don't get a clear next step, what's the next positive thing you can get? That's right, it's a no. A no is a really good thing to get. Why? Because I talked earlier about having that gray area, and that gray area is very ugly. You don't want that. So if you get a yes, that's terrific. If you get a clear and concise next step that everybody's agreed upon, that's also terrific. If you don't get one of those two, the only other option you have is a no. And what's so interesting about a no is when you give somebody the option that, hey, it sounds like this isn't going to work, maybe we take this to a no. You know how many things that you get that are foggy and the excuses? You don't get any. Because when you tell somebody it's okay to give you a no, either they give you a no and you're not wasting any time, or they come up with a reason of why they're not convinced yet and you need to talk a little further. A no is a very good thing. Plus, when you tell somebody it's okay to say no, they want to find a way to say yes. Because you've now told them psychologically that it's not for everybody. They don't want to hear that. So those are the important things there and why those outcomes are important. You have to make sure that every time you have one of those three outcomes. All right? So what we're talking about here is a 5-step process, and I'm going to go through these steps with you. Our very first step is prospecting. Well, why is that the first step? Because everybody has to know how to prospect, and everybody knows that. And you know what? In most of your businesses, I guarantee you, you are not in your business because you said, I want to become an attorney so I can go out and build my book, or I want to be a web designer because I can't wait to go out and sell web design. No. You got in your business because you're good at it, you're passionate about it, and you enjoy it. That's the reason you chose that. What you have to do to bring it to market is merely the thing you have to do to make money at that business. And it's not everybody's favorite. So when it comes to prospecting, we're going to make sure that you understand that and what exactly that takes. Now, a lot of times when we think about prospecting, we think about cold calling. That is not what we're talking about here. Now, to me, prospecting has to be a mix of several types of prospecting. And there's lots of things you can do to prospect. Cold calling is absolutely fine if that's what you decide to do. It's not the best use of your time, but maybe it's part of what you do, and that's fine. But prospecting is not just about that. It's about the variety of things that you do, how often you do them, and tracking what you do. You don't prospect when you're not busy. You prospect all the time. Because what you do today doesn't affect tomorrow. It usually affects next week, next month, and 6-9 months from now. So it's very important that prospecting is a plan that you put together. The next thing is pre-qualification. To me, I don't care if I've done a good job prospecting or a good job with getting myself out there and somebody gave me a referral. It doesn't matter to me how I get it. And I also don't care if somebody calls me for my product or service and they're across the street. I'm not running over there until I pre-qualify them. Well, why is that important? It's important to pre-qualify them for lots of reasons. One, if you don't pre-qualify them, then you're going to waste your time. I don't care how short it is, it's still not a good idea. Second reason is, if you don't pre-qualify them, if you're looking desperate, if you're willing to just run over there and drop everything, their immediate thought is, that seemed a little too easy, and nobody likes anything too easy. As humans, we like to earn things. We like to feel that we've earned them. That's just how we are. And pre-qualification also helps you prepare, if you are going to go on the appointment, what you truly need to be doing. So that's why it's important. The third thing is the actual appointment. Now, when I say appointment, this could be on the phone, it could be in person, it doesn't matter. I'm using the word appointment because I'm most often talking about the in-person step after your pre-qualification. Again, that's not a hard and fast rule. Sometimes I have appointments over the phone with people across the country and I don't meet them until, I get off the plane. That's fine. So appointments are the part that you dig a little deeper. That's the part where you really understand the needs and you really understand what's important to them and how deep it is. And you discover the kind of budgets that they have and their decision-making process. All of those things, that's what you discover in the appointment. So we'll talk in some detail about that. The fourth step is what I call follow-up email. Now, a lot of us do follow-up. And our follow-ups are, thanks so much for our meeting today. I really appreciate it. Looking forward to next week. Means nothing. Follow-up email should be a summary of what you discussed in your appointment. Dear John, thanks so much for meeting with me today. I want to recap the things we talked about. A, here's one of the issues that you had and one of the reasons you're looking at our product or service. B, here is something else that was important because of blah, blah, blah. Whatever it is. And C, this was also an additional thing that you want me to present because you think this would be helpful in your whatever. We discussed a dollar amount being between this, and you said as long as we satisfied the solutions that you needed, you were okay with that dollar amount. And my understanding is if I come back next Tuesday at 3 o'clock, and on next Tuesday at 3, we're going to do this kind of presentation, and at the end of that, you will decide if you like it, and if you do, here's the next steps. And of course, if you don't like it, if we walk away friends. If either of those are, if any of those are incorrect, please let me know. If not, I'll see you next Tuesday at 3. So a follow-up email is not touting yourself. It's a recap of what you talked about. It is not, no surprises, no, hey, I'll call you next Tuesday. You should have already discussed that. So it's an actual, very professional, taking everything that you discussed and put it in writing. Wouldn't you like to find out then, as opposed to when you get in front of them ready to present, that something went awry? So you want to make sure that you know what those steps are and you get them to agree in writing. The last step, which is interesting because it's usually not the last, is your recommendation. And I call it recommendation instead of proposal or presentation because when we think about a proposal or a quote, it sounds like it has to do with money. And it doesn't. It has to do with all the things that you do. A presentation often is touting about ourselves. We do this is what we do, if we have this fancy slideshow. Nobody cares. I know you've been through those. Yawn. They're boring. I don't care about all the wonderful things that you do. What I care about are the things I told you earlier that I want, and that's all I want in the recommendation. So our recommendations need to be skimmed down, they need to be tailored, and they need to be customized to the particular prospect. It doesn't mean you have to make a custom presentation for everybody, but you have to understand what their needs are and match those up. Really what you're doing is a match game. Here's what you said you were looking for, here's what we do to satisfy that. That's what we need to do, and our recommendations is what we believe is going to sell us. It's not. If you've done a good job in this process, if you're pretty much already sold when you get to the recommendation stage, unless you blow it in your recommendations. So this is the steps that we're going to be going through today, and I want you to pull some things out of this that you can use. Now, I want to go back to prospecting, and I want to talk about a strategic alliance. You have to understand what a strategic alliance is first before we talk about networking or prospecting. A strategic alliance is someone that you know, or you meet and you get to know, that you meet with, you learn about what they do, how they do it, what makes them different or special, and who a good referral for them is, who a good client for them is. And you share the same thing. So as you're out and about in your community, and when I say community, I mean either geographic community that you work within or industrial community. In other words, if you work with attorneys, if you work with CPAs, if you work with printing companies, well then that's the area that I'm talking about. So either one. So let's break strategic alliances down so you understand them better. There's pretty much 3 types of strategic alliances. The first one is a complementary product or service, which means when they buy your product or service, they often also buy this one. Some simple examples are a real estate agent and a title company, let's see, some other ones. An insurance agent and maybe a supplemental or commercial insurance. Could be a estate planning attorney and a financial planner or a financial consultant. So that's a complementary product or service. So you have to first understand who that is. Second type of strategic alliance is someone who is calling on or has the ear of the people that you're trying to get in front of. Now, sometimes these two overlap. That's okay. I'm putting this example in there so you understand what I mean. You can think a little bit more outside that box. So somebody that has the ear of your client or prospect, let's think, for example, what that might be. Let's say you are selling to small business owners in downtown St. Louis, Missouri. Who else is talking to small business owners in downtown St. Louis, Missouri? They may have nothing to do with what you do, but they have the ear of your client or prospect. So I want you to first identify who is a good client for you. And if you use the word anyone or someone, you're going to blow it. You need to figure out, yes, I have lots of different categories of people I can talk to, but this is my sweet spot. So that's what you need to identify. I'll give you an example for me. I have corporate clients that I talk to, which is small to medium-sized companies, CEOs. They're usually 10 to 15 to 20 salespeople. If they can be more, they can be less, but that's typically where it is. Those are good people for me. Also individuals, entrepreneurs and individual salespeople, those are terrific too. And then the third one is people that are hiring somebody for a speaking engagement, who are the people that hire. So those are kind of my three categories. Underneath each of those, who talks to those people? So that's what you have to think about. So it's not always a complementary product. It may be just somebody else who talks to that person or sells to that person regularly. The third type of strategic alliance is what I call the movers and shakers, the mavens, the people in your community that are the connectors. And again, community could be geographic or could be industry. So who are those people? They're the people that everybody knows, everybody likes, everybody trusts. And if you got a call from one of those people that said, hey Sue, I met this guy named John, he does this and this, and I really want you to talk to him. I think it would be a real advantage for you to talk to him. You would do it because I recommend it. So that's what a mover and shaker is. So number one, you have to build alliances with them, and number two, you need to become one of them. Because when you are an alliance in your community, when you're somebody that everybody knows, everybody respects, and you're a real connector, you put people together, you try to help them first, if you're the person, then everybody wants to help. So it works both ways. It has to be real, it has to be legitimate, but if you do that, that's one of the ways of building your prospecting portfolio. Now, let's talk about networking in general. Now that you understand what a strategic alliance is, networking is really important to do. So where do you network? What's very important is there's lots of different places to network. There's about 4 places that I recommend, because there are some people that tell me, I network all over town. Don't. Find 3 or 4 places that you think are important to network and dig deep and build relationships there. So what are they? Well, the first one might be your Chamber of Commerce. I think for most businesses, your local Chamber of Commerce is a good place for you to network. The second one might be a trade organization, something that, depending on what it is you do for a living, a trade organization in that industry. But granted, my competitors are there, right, but strategic alliances are there too. It could also be a trade organization of your clients. It could be that as well. The third type of thing is a charity or some sort of a service organization, like the Kiwanis Club, like the Lions Club, like the Rotary Club, like the Heart Association, the Lung Association. There's lots of them. So getting involved in some kind of a charity or organization is also a really, really good thing to do. And the fourth one, in my opinion, is a leads organization. It depends on what your business is, but there's all sorts of small leads groups and networking groups that people are putting together now to help network with each other. I do recommend a more professional networking group. I've been involved with BNI for quite a while, and I think BNI is a super organization. Go to bni.com, and that will help you if you want to find out about them, but I think they're really, really good. People start their own networking groups, and that's okay too, but you typically are more invested when you have to pay and there are rules, so it helps you move along when it comes to those things. But those are the 4 things that I recommend in networking. So you have to think about what organizations do you belong to. Now, one thing you want to do is when you network, you want to set a goal. So when you're networking, I'll give you my example, is when I go to a networking organization, if I'm going to an after hours or whatever it is, I always set a goal. My goal is always the same. I never leave that evening, breakfast, lunch, without finding at least 2 potential strategic alliances. Now you know what a strategic alliance is. So I never leave without meeting 2 of those. That's what's important. So set yourself a goal before you go so you don't waste your time. So each of the activities that we talked about, whether it's the chamber, whether it's a charity, whatever it is, you need to set yourself goals for each one of those. Okay? So that's very important to do. Don't go there and just mull around. You're going to waste your time. Now, what you want to do is when you do get together, when you meet somebody who's a potential strategic alliance, if you want to ask them some questions about them. When I meet somebody at a networking function, I ask them all the same 4 questions. What do you do? How long have you been doing it? What do you like about it? Or tell me a little bit more about it, or it sounds interesting. The 4th question I always ask is, what is a good referral for you? If I was to run into somebody who would be good for you, who would that be? I ask those 4 questions to everybody I meet at a networking event. Why would I do that? I do that because it's much easier when you ask about them to get them to react back to you. It also will give you an idea if somebody's a good potential strategic alliance. Not everybody is going to ask you questions back. Not everybody's going to say, well, Greta, what's a good referral for you? And tell me what you do and tell me more about that. You're only going to get a certain percentage of the people that do that. You know the 80-20 rule? 80% of the business goes through 20% of the people. All you want's the 20%. And you want to be one of the 20%. So don't worry about it. If you run into people that say, well, you know, here's what I do, and here's a good referral for me, and here's some extra brochures, and here's some extra business cards, I'm sure they're very nice people, but they probably aren't a good strategic alliance for you. So that's something you need to understand. Now, here's what's interesting. Sometimes when somebody will say to you, what's a good referral for you, you want to be able to, even if you're at a networking event, give them one specific thing. And again, you saying, anybody who needs a new printer is good for me. People don't sit around and go, God, I need a new printer. Who should I talk to? They don't do that. What they do is there's signals and what I call triggers that will help people understand. So when somebody asks you, well, what's a good referral for you? Even in a networking event, you have to have at least one. And you could say to them something like, a good referral for me is when you go into a client's office and they go to make a copy and they say, oh, the copier's on the blink again. I'm sorry, I can't make you a copy. Or when they say, you know, when you say, hey, can I borrow, you know, something in the office, and they say, well, I don't have any more, I need to order more. You know, whatever it is. You have to give people ideas. You have to paint pictures in their mind that when they see or hear something, they'll think of you. The next thing you do is when you do find one of these potential strategic alliances, somebody that asks you those questions back and you have that conversation going, and you feel like this is a good fit for you, you want to say to them, you know what, Joan, rather than you and I sitting here at this networking event and talking all about what each other does, why don't we continue networking and meeting other people? Why don't you and I set an appointment outside of here to get together, maybe next week, for coffee, so I can learn more about what you do, how you do it, what you guys do differently, and what a good referral for you is. And I'd like to share the same with you. So as we're out and about in our community, we can help each other. What do you think? There's one. So that's when you need to set an appointment with somebody. So your job at a networking function is not to sell what you do. It is to find potential strategic alliances. That's the idea. Now, what happens when you leave that networking event and you have a bunch of business cards of people that maybe weren't good strategic alliances for you, but they're still people, you still want to build relationships? What do? Well, you have to follow up with everyone. And I recommend within 48 hours to follow up. Now, I don't recommend following up through email. If we get a million emails. So if I got an email that said, Greta, it was so nice to meet you, blah, 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 I'd be like, yeah, whatever. It took you no time to do that. What you want to do is do something that you can put in snail mail. What I used to do is hand write notes and put my business card in and send them out. Hey, Jane, it was so nice meeting you. You know, I can't believe you and I went to the same college. Whatever. Put a little something in there and send it to them. The only thing you don't put in there is, and if you ever need, you know, such and such, give me a call. Don't do that. You don't need to do that. This is about building relationships, not about selling. So you should follow up with everybody. So you can either hand write those notes and put them in the mail. Now, I have terrible handwriting. You can't tell, but if you could see me write, it would be ugly. So I found what I call followup-cards.com. It's a division of send out cards, but I really like this particular one. This is what I would do. I can go in there. I don't know what it costs me to get it set up, $100, $200, something. So then the cards end up being about 30 cents a piece. It's fantastic. I can pick any front of the card that I want. I can even upload pictures or logos or anything that I want. So I have that put on the front of the card. I type on the inside what I want it to say. And you can even send them a sample of your handwriting to put that in there. So you can upload your business card. You can do whatever you want. It's really pretty cool, and you can customize each one of them if you want to. It really makes a lot of sense. Plus, it keeps a database of everybody that you've sent to, so you know what you sent, when you sent it to them, their address, and all that stuff. So to me, it's been very helpful. It doesn't matter to me what you do. Whether you do this, whether you handwrite notes on your own, whether you have stationery from your office, it doesn't matter. But do something. You need to follow up with every person that you met quickly, 48 hours. The other thing I like to say is make Swiss cheese out of your newspaper. The reason is, now I know a lot of us don't read paper newspapers anymore, but my question is, have you ever been in your local newspaper? And I imagine most of you were saying, yeah, I have. Okay, so if you've been in your local newspaper, here's my question. How many people said to you, hey, I saw you in the paper last week? Probably quite a few. How many people took the time to cut out an extra copy, put it in a card, and mail it to you? Probably very few, if not any. So that's an excellent thing to do. If you want to make sure that you cut out something about somebody, whether they got promoted, whether it's about their company, whether it's about their industry, or just something you find of interest, that's a very important thing. The other thing that I do now, that I have started doing, because I'm trying to get a little bit more technologically savvy, is I use Google Alerts. If you don't know what that is, if you go to Google and you go into the accounts and you set up a Google account. It's free and it takes about 12 seconds. Once you fill that out, you go down to alerts and you can put in there anything you want. Most people put their name. So you put your name, and every day the World Wide Web gets swept with whatever you put in there, and anything that matches it gets emailed to you. Terrific. But I started putting in my clients, the industries that I work in, people that I'm trying to attract or get on front of that I haven't been able to get an introduction yet. So what I do is I put those things in there, and as they email to me, I look at them, read them, make sure it's something I want to send them, and I will click on that and email it to them. In that case, I think email is fine. That's a really good thing to do. So have Google do the work for you and send those things and say, hey, I read this about you. Hey, I saw this about your industry, thought you'd find it interesting, or something like that. Because now we're doing that drip campaign in front of people, not to say, hey, you ready to hire me yet? But to be in front of them for something that's important to them. So I think that's a really good thing to do as well. So when you go to a strategic alliance meeting, let's go back to that for a minute. Here are some questions I've listed that are really good questions to start with, because not everybody knows what that is. Let them know, here's what we're here to do. I want to learn about your business. I want to learn about what makes you different. I want to share that with you so we can help each other. You're not there to sell each other, and you want to make sure you confirm that at the beginning. And I've listed here some of the things that are important for you to ask to help you get going to learn a little bit about them. You don't have to use these questions, but these work pretty well. The other thing I'd like to recommend to you is something that I use is what I call a top 10 list. A top 10 list is a list of 10 either people or types of people that when somebody says, well, what's a good referral for you? Like at a strategic alliance meeting, you don't hand these out at a networking function. If you take this and you say, here's a good referrals for me, you go through each of them and you leave them a copy of the list. So what are the types of things that go on this list? One, a specific person. I want to meet Jane Doe from ABC Company. It could be a specific industry. I'm trying to meet the CFO of the construction industry. Okay, or it could be a potential strategic alliance. Let's say a good strategic alliance for you is somebody who sells encyclopedias to lawyers. So then you can say someone that you know who sells to lawyers or sells encyclopedias to lawyers or something like that. I make all these things up, but you get my drift. So that's what a top 10 list is, and when I made this up and I started coming up with it, it's kind of catching on. A lot of people use this now. The only reason I called it top 10 was because it sounded good. But you also don't want to make the list much longer, so 10 is a pretty good one. The other thing you want to do at the bottom of your top 10 list is help people understand how to introduce you. The biggest problem we have is, let's say for example, a financial consultant. If you don't teach people how to introduce you, you do such a good job to get to this point, and your strategic alliance said, you know what, I know Jim Jones from ABC Company, I'm going to call him. So they call up and say, hey Jim, I talked to this financial investment guy and he wants to talk to you. Oh great, yeah, send him over. No, what you need to do is you need to come up with a way and put it at the bottom of your top 10 list how to introduce you. For example, hey Jim, I know a guy that I recently met. I've gotten to know him a little bit. He's really sharp, and he has a really different way of looking at the way you invest, especially through this economy. So I think it would be worth your time to at least talk to him. Fine. So you've got to teach people how to introduce you because they don't typically do the better job that they would do if you taught them how to do it. So basically, strategic alliance meetings and getting together with people is to learn about each other, what's a good referral, how to introduce each other to other people, and what are those next action steps. So after your strategic alliance meeting, this is what you want to try to do, that's what you're trying to accomplish, and what you want to do after. That's what makes a successful strategic alliance meeting. But understand, everybody you meet with may end up not being a good strategic alliance. That's okay. Keep going at it. Because when you find people that get it and try to introduce you to others and you introduce them to people, you then become a connector. And that's how you get referrals. So that's pretty much the overview of your prospecting. There's other things to do in prospecting. So those are the things I think if you start out with that, you'll be ahead of the game. Now the next thing I want to talk about is that pre-qualification. It's very important that everybody that you talk to, you pre-qualify ahead of time before you go in and see them. Well, why would you do that? Well, we talked about that a little bit before. Why is it important to pre-qualify? Well, the first reason is you don't waste your time and you don't waste their time. There's nothing worse than somebody saying, hey, I'm going to be in your area on Tuesday. Is 1 o'clock or 3 o'clock better? First of all, that is an old sales line and everybody knows it and it's awful. Secondly, don't act as if you want to go in and present them something, because that's what they're hearing, and the last thing you want to do is have some salesperson come in and present something to them. If you want to say to them, I'm not sure if it's going to make sense for us to get together, but let's talk for a few minutes first, and if it does, we can set an appointment and get together, and if it doesn't, all we wasted was a few minutes on the phone. That I really like, and I think people respect that. The next thing is your prospect will earn the right to meet with you. That's right. Just because you are a salesperson or a business development person, if you don't want to run out to everybody and tell them how wonderful you are, they have to earn the right to meet with you as well. And if you act like that, then they will feel that they've earned the right. Remember I mentioned earlier, earning the right to do something is in the human makeup. If we want to earn the right to do something, as opposed to somebody who's desperate. That's just who we are. The last thing is you need to prepare to have an idea of what you're going to do when you get there, what you need to have. So you need to be able to prepare a little bit, and that's another thing what pre-qualification is about. Plus, if there's somebody else that needs to be in that meeting and they're not, if you need to find that out here as opposed to when you get in front of them. So at a pre-qualification call, usually on the phone, doesn't have to be, but it usually is, you have to set up what you're going to be doing, and you have to ask some really good questions. You have to ask educated, specific discovery questions, which means if you don't want to say, tell me about the goals of your corporation in the next 5 years, that's too big of a question to ask in this scenario. But you do want to ask some educated, specific questions. For example, what prompted the call? What did John tell you about us? Tell me what challenges you're having now when it comes to this, this, and this. So they have to be a little bit more specific, but you do want them to be open-ended because you want them to talk. When they're talking, they're beginning to sell themselves. When you talk, you're selling them, and you selling them doesn't work. The other thing is get your prospect involved. That's why you ask questions. When you ask questions, they begin to talk. When they're talking, they start teaching you things, and the one most important thing they start teaching you is how to sell them. If you can't keep your mouth closed and you keep talking, you're not learning how to sell them. They'll tell you if you ask enough questions and keep quiet. So that's what's important. Now, at the end of your pre-qualification, one or two things is going to happen. You're either going to say, you know what, John, from our conversation today, I think what you're looking for and what I do are two completely different things. So maybe we should just call this a wash and walk away. And that's okay. But if not, and it does make sense for you to meet, then I would say to them, it sounds to me that there's some things here that make sense for us to meet and talk further. What do you think? If they agree, then you set your clear next step. And remember, clear next step has a date of when you're going to follow up, a time of when you're going to follow up, and what those expectations are. Okay? The date, time, and expectations. So you're going to meet, if you're going to open your calendar and you're going to put next Tuesday at 2 o'clock, and the expectations are at that meeting, you're going to bring in your partner and you're going to show us what you did last year with advertising, and this year we're going to look at that and see how we fix your campaign. Whatever it is. So figure out what the expectations are of that next meeting and talk about that before you walk out the door. Send a short follow-up email when you walk out saying, thanks so much for our meeting. Here's what we talked about. We decided to get together next Tuesday at 3, and this and this and this is what we're going to do. So you're going to bring this, I'm going to bring this, and then we will go from there. I mean, it's a short email, but it's just a secure, this is what we're going to do. It's very professional, and it keeps them on track so you don't get a cancellation. Okay? So that's an important thing. Now, the next step after that is what I call the interview, or the actual appointment. The interview is, the reason I call it an interview, and earlier on I call it an appointment as well, but it's intermingling. An appointment sounds like something you are going to present to them. An interview is back and forth questions, and that's what you want to do here. If you are still in the question mode, if you didn't learn enough in the pre-qualification to be able to present yet, So a lot of things you still need to learn. So in the interview, there's a couple things you need to do. First, if you have to review the pre-qualification. Here's what's important to you. Here's what we thought we were going to do today. Here's what, has any of that changed? So you have to review that. Second thing is pre-qualification, the conversation you have before the appointment. So after that, once you've review that and review the pieces in that pre-qualification, then you're ready to move on to the actual questions in the interview. Be sure that you have what they need. That's the other thing you want to make sure in your pre-qualification review. If you don't have what you think they need, then you should have canned that altogether. So you should be here knowing what this appointment is going to be and what they need on their next step. So you start out with what I call ground rules. If you have a time frame, if we talked about having 30 minutes for this appointment, do we still have that? After that, you talk about the agenda of what will happen. Here's what I thought we would do today. So I'm going to ask you some questions. If I looked at your website or I looked at this and I have some additional things I'd like to know, I'm sure you have some things for me. Tell them what's going to happen in that meeting, because especially with questions, you start jamming out a bunch of questions, people are going to go, what are you doing? Can't you just tell me what you're here for? People get frustrated with that, so you have to tell them what you're going to do. And the third part is the expectations. At the end of this meeting, typically what we'll do is we will, after investigating this further, we may still discover that this isn't a fit. And that's okay. What we do isn't for everybody. Or we may decide it is, and then we'll come up with what our next step is, which typically at that point is for me to come in and present to you my recommendations. How does that sound? Something along that line. But you have to set those ground rules right up front, or nobody knows where the appointment's going. What this reminds me of, have you ever been to a corporate meeting where there was no actual agenda? Or they may have been one, but nobody followed it. What do you get accomplished? Nothing. Have you ever been to a meeting where there is an agenda and it's followed and everybody goes through it and you go by the time and at the end you've checked off the things that you needed to cover? Makes much more sense. That's all this is. So the actual interview part is where you're going to ask questions. So again, you review what you talked about on the phone, and you can dig those now deeper than you did before. In other words, you said on the phone, one of the things that was a challenge for you was this. Tell me more about that. And you dig that deeper. There's something called a pain funnel. And you can take those questions and dig them down further and further so you get to what the real issue is. Even though you often think you know what the issue is, it's a lot further than that. Second thing is you want to ask what I call big picture questions. These are thought-provoking questions. These are not leading questions like, if you had the ability to save 10% on your blah, 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 wouldn't that be a help to you? Don't ask a dumb question like that. So they have to be consultative questions. Big picture questions are questions you ask about their goals, about their business, about where they're looking to go, about how the economy affected them, about where they see themselves in a year and 5 years, whatever. There's a lot of questions there. I have some samples. I don't have them all here, but it's very important that you understand what big picture questions are. So they're questions that promote thought. They're open-ended, but they're, talk to me about what your goals are, where you want to be in the next year. We've just kind of come through the worst economy that we could ever come through. Talk to me about what changes in your business you made because of that. But I don't care what it is that you sell. These are the big picture questions because this is stuff they're thinking about. Don't ask questions yet about what you do. Ask questions about what they are concerned about. Then you'll hear a bunch of things. Plus they start talking about them and what's important, and you'll pick out some other things as well. So challenges are one that you want to ask. What do they find as their biggest challenges when it comes to blank? What are their goals? Where are they trying to achieve? Where are they trying to go? And let's project. Let's say it's, I don't know, it's May 2011. Let's say it's May 2012, and we look back and said, this was a very successful year for our company. What would have to happen for you to say that? Something like that. So they're challenge questions, they're goals questions, and they're projection questions. Where are you here? What happens if this happens? That kind of thing. So what you have to do in addition to that is what I call find the pain. That's kind of a sales training term, and I'm not the only one who uses that. But find what I call the pain indicators. When somebody says, one of the biggest challenges we're having is we don't have a two-sided copier, so we have to use 2 different printers to do that, and it takes a lot of time. Our temptation is to jump in and go, oh, we have great two-sided copiers. You'll love them. They're terrific. No. What you do here is say, really, tell me more about that. Well, how long have you had that issue? And how long have you had the two-sided copies that you need? How many of those? Well, what have you done so far to address it? Unless they've already told you, or in this case they did. How did that work? So if you had the ability to cut back on that time, how would that help you? What do you think it's costing you time-wise and paper-wise and ink-wise to be able to do that? Those are the kind of questions you want to ask to get to what I call the real pain, the real issue. And that takes some training to be able to get to those questions. But the idea is you go from the yes, it would be nice to have a two-sided printer, or is it necessary to have a two-sided printer? So that's what you're trying to figure out. Is it nice for them to have your product or service, or is it necessary? From the questions you ask, get them to figure out either if it's nice or necessary. You guide that through questions, not through telling them, it's through questions. The next thing is, I have here WAIT. And WAIT stands for, why am I talking? The reason that's important for you to keep in your mind is you are not going to find pain if you're talking. So the more you talk, the less you are finding pain, because pain comes from their side. So you've got to ask questions, and if you hear yourself talking, you need to shut up and you need to ask another question. So that's a way of helping you. The next part of your interview or your appointment here is the investment. It's very important to figure out what the dollar amount is. So how do you do that? We'll discuss finances at this point after pain, after you've discovered what they're doing now and what it's costing them to continue that. Another question I ask a lot is, well, what's plan B if you don't change this? Okay, that's at the end of the pain. Once you discover that, you want to make sure that you understand how it affects them emotionally, how it affects them dollar-wise. If you can get some potential ROI, that's very, very helpful. But you got to understand those things. And when you do, then you can discuss investment. Make sure that they're on the same page with you. The reason you have to have a discussion of dollars is because if you don't, it's going to be very difficult for you to come back and make a presentation working blind on how much it's going to be. So if you have an idea of how much it's going to be, if you could certainly ask a question like, tell me, do you have a budget or do you have investment set aside for this particular thing? And they're either going to say, yes, I do, no, I don't, or, well, I do, but I'm not going to tell you. It's going to be one of those. And if they say they don't have a budget, no problem. What you need to say to them, and you have to have asked enough questions to be prepared for it, is, from what you've told me so far, it sounds like you're going to be between this and this. So that's kind of what you need to do, is give them that, what I call a range. If you give them the range, you're going to get them to react to that. Wow, that's more than I thought. It's less than I thought. We can't do that. Or that's what. You have to get them to react so you know where you are in the process. If you don't do that, then you're kind of working blind. So that's important. It's also one of your qualifiers. If you also can determine is if everybody's on the same page. That's also going to help, because for you to go away and do some sort of proposal or presentation, if you're not on the same page, that's a problem. So it is very important to get the dollars on the table. Okay? After that is what I call if-then. And if-then is the projection of kind of like creating hurdles to, if I can solve those issues you said you had, like this, this, and this, and if we can work within that dollar range that we talked about and agreed upon, if I come back next week with a proposal and you look at it and you say, Greta, on a scale of 1 to 10, this is an 11. It's exactly what I wanted. What would happen next? So rather than saying, who's the decision maker, who's involved, how long does it take, if you want to put them in that place, it's very important to review these things and then say, if we can accomplish these things and you're happy with them, what happens next? If they're not happy with them, we know what happens. If you like the recommendations we made, and they're within the dollar amount that we discussed, scale of 1 to 10, you think they're an 11, what would happen at that point? It'll give you time frame, it'll give you who's involved, and it'll tell you what the next steps are. This is the part that most salespeople or business development people forget. Because they walk away and say, oh, proposal, great, let me do it. And they don't know what's going to happen on the other side of that proposal. That's where that follow-up, follow-up, follow-up stalking comes in. So we've got to understand, if they get our proposal or recommendations and they like it, what happens next? Hugely important to do that. So the idea is overcoming hurdles. What are the most common hurdles? Too much money, I don't have time, or other people are involved. So you need to say, okay, so our budget doesn't come up until June. Okay, so let's say it's June and your budget came up and you had money in the budget for it. Would you do it? So you project them to that time. So let's say you did have time. If you had time, would you do this? Would you buy this? Would you engage in this? Oh yeah. Tell me why. And you get them to resell it back to you, and then you can have that discussion. So now if their answers are weak, it means you didn't do a very good job back in pain. Okay, so that's what you want to do here, overcoming those hurdles, those pieces that'll hold you back. Now, at the end of this particular meeting, you have to make sure that you have a clear next step, which again has a time, a date, and the expectations of what's going to happen in the next step. You have to summarize what you've said and send out a follow-up email. Follow-up email is very, very important here. I actually even have that as one of my steps because it's that important. Follow-up email is if you summarize everything you've discussed, if you talk about it, make sure you're all on the same page. These are your issues. This is the money we said we'd stay within. And if I come back next Tuesday at 3 o'clock and present to you blah, 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 you said you would have your partner Steve there, and between the two of you, if you can make a decision within 24 hours or whatever. Make sure that's clear. Set your clear next step. And when you go back to your office, you immediately put that in writing. Follow-up email is, thanks so much, Jane, for our meeting today. We talked about this earlier. I want to recap the things we discussed. One of the problems you have is you needed, lots of your copies are two-sided and you're using two printers now to accomplish that. Second thing is it's costing your people a lot of time, and once you calculate it, you think it could be costing you even $10,000 a month just because of this. Whatever it is, if you calculate those things, you discuss them, and then you say that what we talked about were a couple of different options for you, and they'll be somewhere between $1,000 and $2,000 a month. The other thing we said was that you and your partner Steve would be here next week. We will review our recommendations. We'll bring in a sample. If you like it, here's what you said the next step would be. And of course, if you don't like it, we walk away friends. If any of the above is incorrect, let me know. If not, I'll see you on Tuesday at 3 o'clock. So you put that in writing, everything you agreed on. This is not, and we're so wonderful, you'll love our company, we're going to do a great job for you. It's none of that. It's a recap of what you talked about, and that's all it is. So it's summarizing all that you agreed upon, that's all. So I want to make that clear. So the very last step here is your presentation. If you want to review again what you agreed upon. So it's almost like at the beginning of your presentation, you're almost going through that follow-up email again, but you're doing it verbally here. Here's what we said we agreed upon. If you set those ground rules, this is how long we have, this is what we're going to do today, and at the end of today, this is what we decided was going to happen. Has any of that changed? Make sure you do that here. It's very, very important. Then present your ideas with interaction. If you have a long, detailed presentation, if you need to relook at that. Hopefully you have no more than 1 or 2 pages, because the more information you give them, the more you force them to go away and have to think about it. If you don't want to do that, if you want to summarize it to the things that they said were important and the things you're going to present, go up against that. Don't make it a dog and pony show. Don't make it some big presentation that you're going to show them, tout all the wonderful things that you do. If you can have those things as a leave behind, but don't do that in the meeting, because the more information you give them, the more you force them to go away and think about it. Zero it into what they said was important, because that's all they care about anyway. The last thing is, what's going to happen at the end of this, you're either going to maintain the ground rules, which is, here's what's going to happen at the end of today, or you're going to bring it to a no. If they decided that Jane and Steve were going to be in this meeting and they were going to make a decision within 24 hours, and if that's what they told you at the end of the last meeting, then that's what you put in their follow-up email, and that's what you discussed at the beginning of this meeting, and at the end of this meeting they say, well, we probably need about a week, you need to, halt. I'm confused. What happened? What changed? And if you can't get a straight answer out of them, you need to say, you know what, it sounds like you're just being really nice and this isn't a fit and you don't want to tell me no. I'm a big girl. You can tell me no. Why don't we just take it to a no and walk away? If you need to do that because that's what you said you would do. Then most of the time, if they say yes, it's a no, then fine. But most of the time what's going to happen is there's something else hanging out there that you don't know about. And if you don't bring it to that black or white, you're going to get gray. And there's your follow-up again. So presentation or proposal, whatever it is that you do, is very important. But make sure it's your recommendations, not a presentation. So that's what you want to make sure you do. So to review, the 5 steps are prospecting, pre-qualify every call, set an appointment or the interview for your appointment, do your follow-up email, and then the last step are your recommendations. So that's the overview of this whole process. Now, if you found this information valuable and would like more information on our complete program that breaks this down so that you work on in detail, and you have a book that goes along with it, and you have phone coaching, and it really, really helps you roll up your sleeve and learn this stuff, go to b2bsalesplaybook.com. B2b salesplaybook.com. Thank you so much and good selling.